We are now ready to move on to the third litmus test. Does Scripture show him functioning as a principle of unity in moments of dispute? There's two main passages cited as proof of the negative verdict. The first is Acts 15, the second, Galatians 2. For the sake of time, I won't read the entire passage. In short, the Council of Jerusalem addresses the issue of whether Gentile converts must be circumcised and follow Mosaic law to be saved. Some believers from Judea argue for circumcision, and after much debate with no headway, Paul, Barnabas, and some of the others travel to Jerusalem for clarification. Upon arrival, they share the joy of Gentile conversions, but some of the converts who were Pharisees insist on the necessity of circumcision. And so the council begins. After much debate, Peter stands and the whole room falls silent. He then speaks, emphasizing that God has accepted Gentiles through faith, not law, and questions the imposition of burdens that even the Jewish ancestors could not bear. James then supports Peter's view, citing Amos 9, about God's intention to include Gentiles, and James explicitly anchors his remarks on Peter's testimony. Quote, Simeon has related, meaning James is not correcting Peter, but building on Peter's settled conclusion. He proposes that Gentiles should not be troubled, but should avoid certain practices, such as idolatry and unlawful marriage. The apostles and presbyters agree to send a letter to Gentile believers in Antioch, clarifying that they do not need to follow the full Mosaic law, only to abstain from specific prohibitions. Now, the argument put forth by adherents to the conciliar objection is essentially this. Yes, Peter speaks first and sets the tone, but it is James who has the final word. If Peter were the head of the church, James' affirmation wouldn't have been necessary. Further, James says, quote, it is my judgment, which implies he was the superior authority at the council. However, a closer look at the text reveals a flaw in this reasoning. There is, quote, much debate until Peter speaks. When he speaks, the room falls silent and the debate does not rile back up. Peter speaks and the debate is over. Peter decided the what on the council's decision. James proposes the how to implement the decision. And this is important since James was the head of the Jerusalem church. Remember, earlier in the chapter, the Judaizers who caused the initial disruption, prompting the council being called, were from Judea. This alone doesn't prove that they were members of the Jerusalem church that James presided over, but it places them, at the very least, in direct proximity of James' authority. Then we read immediately prior to the council officially beginning, when Paul and Barnabas arrive at Jerusalem, they are welcomed and begin explaining what God had been doing with them, and we read, quote, but some from the party of the Pharisees who had become believers stood up and said, it is necessary to circumcise them and direct them to observe the Mosaic law. So the same sentiment which was carried by those men from Judea who had gone out and begun troubling the Gentile believers is also carried by the Pharisee converts in the Jerusalem church itself. It's therefore fitting for James, the head of the Jerusalem church, to ratify and affirm his assent to Peter's decision. And furthermore, since the problem originated within his own congregation, or at least closely adjacent to it, it is also fitting for him to propose the pastoral application of Peter's decision. Remember, there is much debate until Peter stands up. And after Peter speaks, the assembly falls silent. The debate ended with Peter. James speaks to propose how to implement Peter's verdict logically to avoid offending Jewish Christians. If James were the supreme authority, why did the debate only stop when Peter spoke? Peter settled the doctrine. James suggested the discipline. James' judgment is a pastoral suggestion on how to live out the truth Peter just definitively stated. In the Greek context of a council, the chief authority, Peter, provides the dogma, the universal truth, while the local host, James, provides the canon, the rule of local conduct. James' judgment wasn't an authorization of Peter, it was the local implementation of the universal decree to ensure the peace of his specific community.